of disastrous economic news, not everybody was a loser. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, was one of the big winners.
The stock market suffered one of its worst days in years.
700 Wednesday, the manic depressive market
lost more than 4%.
Crashing down Monday after Congress failed to pass a bill that would help rescue the nation's economy from financial disaster.
Every time there is one of these disasters on Wall Street, through history, somebody emerges as the consolidator, the person who steps in, who has enough strength to kind of take over some of the failing firms. In the 1890s, it was JP Morgan himself who performed that role. And last year, it was the bank that bears JP Morgan's name that performed that role. JP Morgan Chase, under Jamie Dimon, had become a very lean and efficient organization, did not take some of the same types of risks that many other investment banks did. And so when things started to go poorly, he was in a position to help.
In March, Jamie Dimon picked up Bear Stearns at a fire sale price.
I tell people buying a house and buying a house and fire are two different things.
He was able to add not only its investment banking operations, but its headquarters building in Manhattan, which was basically worth the whole price he paid for that.
In September, Dimon took over Washington Mutual.
Was basically able to pick it up for very little money and thus vastly expanding its retail banking footprint throughout the country.
But Dimon shouldn't rest easy. As the recession looms on, 2009 holds enormous challenges.
One of the big things to look for is how JP Morgan Chase and other banks will deal with the credit problems that are continuing to arise. We know so much about housing, and that's still an issue. But there are large issues with credit card loans, student loans, corporate loans. All that remains to be seen how well they will weather that storm. The one thing they do have going for them, what every bank wants, is a solid base of deposits, because they can't raise money from the capital markets the way they used to. They have probably the biggest deposit base in the country right now.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also found herself negotiating the 2008 primary battle between Obama and Clinton. While she never formally took sides, some saw an implicit endorsement of the change candidate.
Her real job in this past year was being the Democrat probably with more actual power than anyone else in the party. We saw that come to the fore in the economic crisis as Democrats were figuring out what they were going to do in response to this White House bailout plan on Wall Street. It was Nancy Pelosi in the end who had to make the call about what exactly the Democrats were going to do and whether they were going to work with the George W. Bush White House a month before a presidential election. It was not an easy position for her to be in, and she was the one who made the ultimate decision there.
As Barack Obama takes the oath of office in January 2009, Pelosi loses her spot as #1 Democrat in town. She lands, however, on Newsweek's list at 24.
I think with Nancy Pelosi, you're going to see a great deal of sensitivity about being the sort of liberal face of the Democratic Party. She wants to make sure, first and foremost, that her House Democrats aren't seen as outside of the mainstream. At the same time, she is very mindful of the groups that are part of her constituency in the House. They put her in the Speaker's chair. And they're not necessarily going to go along with every centrist piece of the Obama agenda. She's got to figure out what's my own agenda on issues like healthcare and education. And the White House might not like everything that she's going to do, and Pelosi has indicated that she's not just going to be a lackey.
It's possible you've never heard of Timothy Geithner. But as Barack Obama's pick for Treasury Secretary in these troubled times, Geithner shoots to the top of Newsweek's elite list.
Timothy Geithner was the president of the New York Federal Reserve, someone who's really below the radar to the public, but on Wall Street that's very important. That was the eyes and the ears of the Fed on Wall Street. And when all these crises were happening, working over the weekends to decide whether Lehman Brothers would live or whether the government rescue AIG, all this was happening in his office. He's a slim guy, but he is going to have a remarkably full plate. All sorts of stuff on his plate that he has to deal with.
Geithner will have to manage the $700 billion rescue of Wall Street government ownership of AIG, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, as well as the possible bankruptcy of American automakers. Add to that a Democratic push for Wall Street reforms, and it's no wonder Geithner is Newsweek's 15th most powerful person in the world.
We need a new type of infrastructure, regulatory, that's market-based, to deal with these issues that have cropped up. And they don't just have to be domestic, they have to be international, because that's where our markets are.
But while Geithner will certainly be important, last word on financial policy will rest with another.
I think Obama is going to be relatively hands-on. He's not going to be content simply to delegate everything. And I don't think it's going to be the type of administration where sort of cabinet members sort of decide what they're doing and then inform the president. So I think Obama ultimately has the greatest power when it comes to deciding what our policies will be. Geithner is going to be an influential advisor and really the person who has to execute a lot of that, which is really important.